The ice in my glass was the only thing making noise in that cavernous, marble-tiled kitchen. I wasn't supposed to be there, and she certainly didn't expect me to be sitting in the dark, watching the headlights of a charcoal-gray Bentley sweep across the floor-to-ceiling windows. I saw my wife, Elena, step out of the passenger side, her laughter echoing through the manicured gardens of a mansion that didn't belong to us. She looked radiant, draped in a cashmere coat I'd never seen before, leaning back to plant a lingering kiss on a man who definitely wasn't me. In that moment, the man I used to be, the husband who trusted her blindly, died right there on that designer bar stool. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that night in the hills of Montecito destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, I need to take you back to where the rot first started. 3 years ago, Elena and I were the couple our friends used as a benchmark for making it. We lived in a modest but beautiful craftsman home in the suburbs of Portland. I'm a structural engineer, and Elena had spent a decade working as a mid-level interior designer. We had our routines: Friday nights at a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor for fish tacos, Sunday morning hikes with our golden retriever, and a shared dream of retiring to a cabin in the woods. I called her Lainey, and she called me her anchor. We were solid, or so I thought. The shift happened when Elena landed what she called her dream pivot. She told me she'd been headhunted by a boutique firm specializing in high-end estate liquidation for the ultra-wealthy. "It's high stakes, Mark," she told me over dinner, her eyes bright with a new kind of intensity. "These families are incredibly private. When a patriarch dies or a divorce happens, they need someone to live on-site for a few weeks to inventory everything, manage the auctions, and ensure the valuables don't go missing. It means I'll be away a lot, but the commissions, they're life-changing." I was proud of her. I really was. I even helped her pack her bags for her first assignment in Lake Oswego. That should have been my first warning. The way she packed. She wasn't just taking professional blazers. She was packing silk slips and her most expensive perfume. But when she returned 2 weeks later with a $10,000 bonus check, I let my common sense be drowned out by the rustle of money. I thought we were building our future. What I didn't realize was that Elena was already living a completely different one. The first crack in the facade appeared about 6 months in. It was a Tuesday, around 11 p.m. Elena was supposedly on site at a historic manor in the West Hills. I was folding laundry when I found a dry cleaning tag in the pocket of her favorite trench coat. It wasn't for a woman's blazer. It was for a man's tuxedo, and the name on the slip wasn't mine. It was Vane. When I asked her about it the next morning, she didn't even blink. "Oh, that? Mr. Vane is the client. He's incredibly helpless, Mark. He didn't even know how to get his suits pressed for the estate gala. I'm a glorified assistant sometimes, but for what they pay, I'll drop off his laundry all day long." She laughed it off, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she'd be home late. If that was all I found, maybe I could have let it go. Maybe I would have remained the oblivious husband. But then I checked our shared iPad. Elena had forgotten to log out of her Find My Phone feature. A few nights later, while she was supposedly working late at the warehouse, her dot wasn't at a warehouse. It wasn't even in the city. It was stationary at a massive coastal estate 2 hours away. I told myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the warehouse was near the coast? I tried to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I called the firm she worked for, Sterling Estate Management.
The woman who answered the phone sounded confused. "I'm sorry, sir? We don't have an Elena on staff. We don't even have a liquidation department. We're a commercial property firm." My blood went cold. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I hung up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I realized then that Sterling Estate Management was just a name on a fake business card she'd had printed. Everything, the late nights, the assignments, the secretiveness, was a lie. But why the money? Where were those massive checks coming from? I knew exactly what I was going to do next, but I had to be patient. I had to see the truth with my own eyes. I spent the next 3 days acting completely normal. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I kissed her goodbye, I asked her how the inventory was going, and I watched her pack another bag for a 5-day stint in Montecito. She had no idea I'd installed a small, magnetic GPS tracker on the underside of her SUV. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I followed at a distance. I followed her for 6 hours. She didn't go to an office. She didn't go to a warehouse. She drove straight through the gates of a sprawling, Mediterranean-style mansion overlooking the Pacific. I parked a quarter-mile down the road and waited. I watched through a pair of binoculars as a man in his 50s, tall, silver-haired, looking like he stepped out of a yachting magazine, met her at the door. He didn't greet her like an employee. He swept her into his arms, and she melted into him. I stayed in my car for 12 hours. I watched the lights go out in the main house. I watched the sunrise. I realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a career. I did some digging while sitting in that car. I looked up the property records. The owner was Julian Vane, the name from the dry cleaning tag. He was a billionaire venture capitalist. I started searching for other estates she'd worked at. Every single one was owned by a wealthy, single man. Elena wasn't liquidating their estates. She was living in them. She was playing the role of the devoted, high-class girlfriend for weeks at a time when these men were in town, and then returning to me, her anchor, when they flew back to London or New York. I was her home base, the man who kept her life stable, while she auditioned for a billionaire's wife. The rage was a cold, hard lump in my throat. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I went home, and I started my own inventory. I waited until her assignment was supposed to end. On Friday night, I knew Julian Vane was hosting a small dinner party. I'd seen the caterers arriving while I sat in the shadows of the road. I didn't go to the rusty anchor. I put on my best suit, took the spare key I'd watched her hide under a stone by the gate earlier that week, and I walked right in. The house smelled of expensive lilies and roasting lamb. I could hear music, soft jazz, coming from the terrace. I walked through the house, marveling at the sheer scale of her deception. There were photos of her and Julian on the mantel. In them, she looked like a different person, dressed in Chanel, diamonds at her throat. I found them on the terrace. Julian was pouring wine for 3 other couples. Elena was sitting at the head of the table, looking every bit the mistress of the house. "The sea bass is exquisite, darling," one of the guests said to Elena. "Thank you," Elena replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Julian and I worked with the chef for weeks to get the menu just." She stopped. Her glass froze halfway to her lips. She had spotted me standing in the doorway. The color didn't just leave her face. It was as if her entire soul evaporated. Her hand started to shake so violently that the red wine sloshed over the rim of the crystal glass, staining the white linen tablecloth like a bloodstain. "Mark," she whispered. The word was so small I almost didn't hear it.
Julian stood up, his brow furrowed. "Can I help you? Who are you?" I walked forward, my footsteps heavy on the stone tile. I looked Julian straight in the eye. He looked like a decent man, someone who thought he'd found a beautiful, sophisticated partner. He had no idea he was a client. "I'm the estate liquidator," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm here to inventory the remains of my marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. One of the female guests gasped. Elena tried to stand, but her knees gave out, and she sank back into her chair. "Julian," she stammered, her eyes darting between us. This is my brother. He's having a breakdown. Mark, please, let's go outside." "Your brother?" I let out a short, sharp laugh that felt like a razor blade in my throat. I reached into my pocket and pulled out our wedding album, the small one she kept in her nightstand at home, which I'd snatched before I drove down. I tossed it onto the table. It landed right in front of Julian. "Check the date on page 1, Julian. June 14th. We've been married 7 years. I'm the man who pays the mortgage on the house she returns to when she's finished working for you. I'm the man who feeds her dog and listens to her stories about liquidating assets while she's actually liquidating your bank account." Julian picked up the book. His hands were steady, but his face turned a shade of gray that matched his hair. He flipped through the pages. Our wedding, our honeymoon in Bali, the Christmas photos in front of our tree. He looked at Elena, who was now hyperventilating, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Elena?" Julian's voice was a low growl. "What is this?" "I love you, Julian," she wailed, the mask finally shattering. "Mark, you don't understand. It was just business at first. We needed the money for the cabin." "The cabin?" I cut her off. "We didn't need billionaire blood money for a cabin, Elena. Or maybe a consultant." Julian closed the album with a soft thud. "She told me she was a widow," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She said her husband died in a car accident 3 years ago." The betrayal hit me all over again, a fresh wave of nausea. She hadn't just cheated, she'd buried me. In her mind, I was already dead. "Well," I said,
straightening my jacket. But this marriage? This is definitely deceased. I looked at Elena one last time. She was sobbing now, the ugly, snotty kind of crying that ruins expensive makeup. She looked small. She looked cheap. The glamour of the mansion couldn't hide the rot anymore. I've already moved your things into the garage, Elena. The locks are changed. You like living in other people's houses so much. I suggest you find a new one by tonight. I hear the liquidation business is booming. I walked out of that mansion without looking back. I didn't wait for her to chase me. I didn't wait to see if Julian kicked her out, though I heard later he had a security detail escort her to the gate within 20 minutes. The drive home was the longest of my life. I cried, yeah. I screamed until my throat was raw. But by the time I pulled into my own driveway, the sun was coming up, and for the first time in 3 years, the air felt clean. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I kept the Craftsman apps. I kept the dog. Elena tried to sue for a portion of my retirement, but when my lawyer presented the evidence of her secondary income and the fraud she'd committed, she settled for almost nothing just to keep the story out of the local papers.
Sometimes I still go to the Rusty Anchor on Friday nights. I sit at the bar, eat my fish tacos, and look at the empty seat next to me. I thought I'd be bitter forever, but I'm not. I lost a woman I loved, but I found a man I respect. The one who walked away when the world turned to glass. I'm nobody's anchor anymore. I'm my own captain now, and the view from the shore has never been clearer.